Good morning. My name is Steve Brummer, and I am a partner in a firm called 151 Advisors. We are an international advisement strategy consulting firm. Our whole premise is to help companies. Well, we help geeks who need help on the sales, marketing, business development, go-to-market side of it. So I have personally been in wireless over 27 years and have been in M2M. I'm going to say M2M, for over 15 years. And so I have this unique view of the hardware side now all the way over to the how do we make money in this IoT world. So it's very important. And I also just have to say, does anybody know what today is?
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Tuesday.
It's a day where I have now crossed over the threshold.
Today's your birthday.
I am 60 years old today, and I'm spending it with you crazy people in the IoT world. That's, no wife, no kids, I'm here with you. So it's an interesting day for me, but it's a party on, Garth, exactly.
I want to say after 59 other birthdays, I can understand why you'd be tired of it, but that's another issue.
That's exactly right. But I'm in Fort Lauderdale, so it can't be bad.
Ryan, go ahead.
Good morning. I'm Ryan Martin. I'm a senior analyst at API Research. Formerly, I was an analyst at 451 Research, and before that, Yankee Group. So, like Steve, spent a lot of time in M2M, and now we call it IoT, and that's where I spend a lot of my days these days.
Hi, my name's John Phelan. I'm the CEO of Argus Insights. Argus Insights basically measures the fit between product and market. We spend a lot of time looking at where IoT, where the Internet of Things overlaps and matches up with the Internet of Humans, and understanding what's driving adoption or slowing that adoption from a customer and consumer point of view.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dima Tokar, co-founder of a firm by the name of Mach Nation. We're an IoT research and analyst firm, specializing mostly in sort of the upper layers of technology stack in IoT, so a lot of the platforms, analytics, visualization, application, things like that. So look forward to speaking with you.
Great. Godfrey Chua, Principal Analyst from Akina Research. We're a global IoT specialist firm. I look at North America and Asia Pacific in particular, but we also have a team out in Europe as well as in Hong Kong that sort of looks at the rest of the world.
I'm James Brehm. I'm founder and the guy that pays the taxes and insurance for a team of 10 people, James Brehm and Associates. I've assembled people from many different backgrounds to basically take a look at what IoT is doing, where it's going, and take a pragmatic view of why haven't we slid down that hype cycle.
Yeah, so let's deal with that, because the very first question I got asked from Kathleen at Sandhill was, isn't this all hype? And the Gartner chart now has us at the very peak. So I fully admit that there are some companies that I think are riding a wave of balloon air, but there's a lot of other stuff going on where we've got real stuff going on. So I'd love to hear from you guys as to what you see and whether or not getting labeled as hype is real or not. So Godfrey, how about I start with you?
Sure. I think that's a great question, right? And I'm an economist by training, so unfortunately I'm going to answer with it depends. So, and let me put that in context. So to give everybody a little bit of quick background is I used to be a customer of Makina Research, right? And what I found very interesting about the two founders of the company was they spent a year building out our market model. And the market model is based on 200 IoT use cases. And they were the first firm that I saw do it that way. And it actually made sense when I was doing product and solution marketing that as we were trying to look at M2M and IoT, that's the way to look at this market. So, and of course 200 is not even enough. So within that 200, there are some that are totally being hyped up right now, but there are some that are also very real markets right now where people are making money, making good margins, and building up a good scale business. So I don't think we can lump IoT into just one descriptor. IoT is many different markets. I'll cut it short there.
Should I get you to parse and say which ones you like and which ones you don't?
I'm happy to speak to that, but do we have all day, right? So I think maybe the place that's most hype right now. So I just came back from Asia a week ago, and I spent 2 hours with with the largest mobile operator in one of the Southeast Asian countries. Spent 2 hours with them trying to convince them that holding their breath for that killer consumer IoT application that they would deploy and get millions of connections in the next 6 months probably isn't going to happen for them this year. And that they really need to rethink their enterprise strategy in IoT, because that's where their peers are making their money. So there are people that are still kind of believing the hype and need a little bit of a sanity check, more discussions. I don't want to get too much into the details, but this is a very real company with a huge subscriber base that's still banking on the hype of consumer IoT.
Well, it's like we're still in the search for that iPhone moment.
Exactly.
And it's not necessarily going to happen like that in M10 and IoT, because a lot of this is operational. So it's like you can have the core technology, you can have something that works, but unless you have the people to actually go out and deploy this stuff or roll it out, and then, oh yeah, by the way, it has to work with the technology that your customer uses, not just this customer, but all your customers. So to actually, in practice, have that working is a lot more than saying, ooh, 2007, got an iPhone, all right. It's not like that. It's going to take time, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take a lot of grit, too, in terms of actually banging this stuff out and getting everything to work together.
But there are a few bright spots on the consumer side. I agree that the consumer stuff is incredibly hyped. We've seen demand slide even as the buzz and the social conversations boost. But companies like SimpliSafe and Vivint have figured out how to bridge that gap between the promise that we give to consumers about what IoT is going to deliver to their lives and the reality of it. Whereas a lot of the other brands are either trying to build their own walled gardens or a community garden that isn't quite working because people don't really want to eat their broccoli. And one of the challenges we see in all the IoT piece for consumers is still that setup of connectivity, which is why Vivint and SimpliSafe have managed to, within the ecosystems they manage, create a compelling experience that's actually driving adoption and growth for them, when the rest of the market's sort of going, oh yeah, yet another security camera. I mean, one thing that we saw at CES this year...
John, are you really saying that Vivint, SimpliSafe, have had the iPhone moment? Shame on you. Come on now, let's be real.
No, they haven't
Don't create the hype. Don't stand behind
No, it's not.
BS.
They haven't had the iPhone moment, right? And we can talk about the iPhone moment. I was at the front lines of the whole thing. But CES showed us that anybody can get a radio, a battery, and a processor, wrap some white plastic around it, and call themselves an IoT company.
That's right. Yeah,
so the device wars are over.
Yeah, the wearable section, like in Eureka Park, was insane.
Yes.
I mean, just to be able to go up and down every row and look at another wearable or another Fitbit type of product, and it was, I don't know how
But take a step back. Take a step back to Eureka Park, or what it was called 5 years ago.
Yeah, definitely. It was small.
Okay? 186 different tablet companies there, too.
Oh, yeah.
Right? What's dominating?
Now
I think somebody's had an iPhone moment.
Now there's 186 hoverboard companies. Right.
So if I can get in between a little bit for that, managing the hype and managing the reality check, right? Because I think what's interesting, to your point about, John, about some of these companies breaking through is what we have to look at is the solution process that these innovators are going through and what makes them push through, right? So my conversation with that Southeast Asian operator, I said, look at China, right? Everybody here probably knows Xiaomi. So what a Xiaomi does is they take the use cases that are evolving in North America and Europe and deconstructing it and saying, how do you apply it to a market like China? So I deploy a Fitbit that costs 1/10 the amount. They're huge on the smart home. Did you know that Haier and Alibaba have partnered for connected air conditioners? And they grew 1,000% last year, but of course that's from a small base, right? But the one consumer IoT, at least telecom segment that we've seen perk up was actually China Mobile. That has done the same thing. They've taken these use cases that everybody in North America and Europe are trying. They're not just taking them and deploying them. They're actually deconstructing them, working with their device partners. You know, they take the Nest thermostat, which in the U.S. is not even a mass market device, right? It pays it off in the U.S. maybe 13, 18 months. I'm sure there's a bunch of folks here that have a Nest and have seen that happen. But what they're trying to do is, well, let's create a $30 thermostat because the HVAC use case does have some merit in parts of China. I come from the Philippines, and it's hot and muggy there at this time of the year. There is a value proposition around that. Everybody says connected home security is a great value proposition. In markets like China or the Philippines or Southeast, people have drivers and maids to watch the kids at home. So the video camera just doesn't have the same value prop there. So we have to keep looking at the distinct market, distinct technologies, and distinct economics. So again, it goes back to that multiple IoT markets, not just the segments, but also geographies and conditions. So.
Yeah, and I would add, I think we're also hearing a lot of interest from telecom system integrators trying to figure out how to sort of build their technology stack on top of the right components so that they can actually be ready for whatever that next big idea is, whether that's a consumer idea or an enterprise idea. They're looking for platforms, they're looking for technologies that are modular, that are horizontal, that are flexible, so that even if they buy something that's not going to be used to its full capacity today, something down the line, 2-3 years, when there's a next big enterprise industrial idea that needs to be deployed, their customers are going to ask for it, and they want to have the technology in place that's ready for it. So that's the big challenge, is not necessarily building that vertical solution right away, but positioning yourself in a way that allows you to build them down the line once the other technologies and the operational sort of elements of the business are ready for that.
So let's put the consumers over to the side for the moment, and let's go and talk business and enterprise and industrial. And what do you guys see there? What's going on? James, you want to talk about some recent surveys you've done?
Yeah, so we did a survey in conjunction with your team recently and interviewed a pile of actual enterprises. 73% of them have said that they've actually, and this goes back to why Gartner's saying we're at the top of the hype cycle, 73% of enterprises are saying they've actually deployed some sort of IoT. Now, are they deploying it end-to-end is the question. And the answer to that is certainly not. But it really puts us up to why we're kind of up at that standpoint. But when we take a look at it, I jotted down a bunch of different things. Steve and I were talking about these this morning. Some of the challenges behind why people aren't deploying this en masse. I was looking at 44% can't prove the ROI. Okay. About 15% don't believe their numbers, right? When they're looking at the analytics, don't believe them.
Don't believe them.
I believe that's the hubris of the enterprise, right? Instead of taking the numbers and digesting them and believing them and looking at them, I know too much already because it's my business and this IoT is not going to make me any better. So it's the hubris of the enterprise.
It's nice to know if you're an analytics company. The 15% of the people that don't care about you, what numbers you give them. Sales 101, that's great. That's my close.
14%.
I can think of some companies that's a sales opportunity right along. Go ahead.
14% have no plans to deploy right now over the next 12 months, right? No, zero. So there's a long tail out there for us as well. Even if we're kind of at that top of the hype cycle, as I've always said, Carl, here for 5 years, if this is a baseball game, what inning are we in? It's spring training yet.
Right.
But I was really impressed with the idea of the top concerns on some of the companies that you surveyed. One being security was the number one, interoperability, and then ROI is the top three. And you really look at security being a huge aspect. It's definitely CES was a very, very big topic, whether absolutely. To put a in-home gateway behind, as a firewall behind the router, and how many companies were building security gateways in order to capture and help on a lot of different areas. And also that's going to end up happening in the connected car world too. They're going to have some kind of security gateway. So that interesting that the survey came back with one of the big concerns that I have in the industrial side is being able to get access to that information.
Yeah, we actually see within the overall IoT conversation, security shows up as a topic twice as much as privacy.
Correct.
Yep. I mean, overall, whether it's enterprise or consumer, we're more concerned about our stuff being stolen than people actually having access to our goodies.
Yep. The ROI element is also interesting because it's, a lot of these things have been oversold to an extent as a metric more so than the technology that it actually is. And if the ROI isn't clear when it comes to IoT, it means your problem probably isn't big enough. Or, said differently, if we're talking about hype, a lot of these solutions are just that. They're solutions in search of a problem. They're not putting the problem first when in development, and as a result, we get this hype, which is why we're all up here talking about this. And I think it's justified as well, just because there is so much sort of attention and also language wrapped around solutions that have been around for a very long time, but really haven't changed. But what's changed is sort of the marketing or maybe the organizational structure, which is supporting those solutions. A lot of big companies with just a few letter acronyms are just as guilty as the smaller players as well, I think, in this regard.
Godfrey, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, if I could expand on the surveys, because we've done a set of surveys as well, and I think what's been pointed out is really interesting. And I think true to the nature of the complexity of IoT and the subset of markets, right? Because security coming out is the number one concern. Fair enough. What's interesting is we sort of expanded on that and we asked the question, well, what about security are you actually concerned about, right? And that's when you start seeing how the complexity of IoT really starts to play out, because people are concerned about the fact that I can't update my devices as often as I would like. I am concerned about security and data protection and privacy as well.
You know, that scares hell out of me, Godfrey, because Verizon and AT&T just rolled out their Cat 1 specifications for LTE Category 1.
Yep.
And if you take a look at they're really restrictive. You can only connect once a day to each of those devices. So how the hell are you going to update the device?
Well, and that's why enterprises are scared of these things,
Yeah.
right? Because they are seeing systems that don't allow them to do that. And we've heard already the horror stories, even just the baby monitors, right? And once the products are out, if the firmware is outdated, how do we fix these things? So this only feeds into the friction points that we're seeing within the adoption of IoT. And it is incumbent upon the ecosystem to help solve these issues.
Damon, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that. And I would add that I think most firms that are looking at IoT, they're sort of viewing security as a liability. They're sort of saying, these are the reasons why we shouldn't do IoT, or these are the reasons why we shouldn't do this project, but we should do that project instead. And I think until security is viewed as an investment, rather, this is going to be how we're going to be different from our competitors. We're going to build security, and we're going to talk about security as part of the solution that we provide. That's what makes it pretty difficult until you can get to a point where security is something that's actually a differentiator rather than just something that prevents you from moving forward with a certain project.
So here's a question. We know that a lot of the deployments are driven by operations and not by IT per se. So those two faults that we're finding where they don't trust their analytics and they don't trust security strike me as IT kind of saying, hey guys, what are you doing here? Is that a fair cop as to how we should think about what's going on internal to the companies? Are we getting to the point where the two have to combine and actually talk to each other finally so that we get to the point where we know
I'm not sure that's going to happen in our lifetime. Is that ever going to happen? Well, no matter what?
I mean, we've seen the same battle break down between IT and marketing with the rollout of marketing automation and CRM and Salesforce and all that kind of stuff, where now you've got boots on the ground swiping credit cards to bring systems into IT infrastructures, and the IT guys, are losing their hair faster than I am. And yeah, it's almost gone. It's a race between gray and gone. And what's interesting about that is that as IT realizes they're getting disrupted, and they have to realize they have to become a partner rather than a gatekeeper, that's going to really change us a lot too. And so the sooner we can move from a notion that security is something that absolutely has to be guaranteed, and start thinking about how do we fail gracefully. Some of the things we saw yesterday with the Battle of the Platforms last night, where they talk about fog versus cloud and all those things, and how do you have enough local intelligence to fail in a graceful fashion. That, I think, is going to go a long way towards addressing the schism between those organizations. And as part of IT, kind of goes, oh, does anyone still need to talk to me anymore? You need a new email account? Yeah.
Right, got it. Godfrey, you look like
just to expand on John's point, and obviously we need to take our surveys with a grain of salt, too, right? That's why it's also important to talk deep dives with enterprises themselves, CISOs and CTOs and all that good stuff. But we did a survey where we actually found something slightly different. We did a survey last year, enterprises across 5 different countries, across 6 different functional groups within an organization. So I think that's really important for the solution developers out there trying to sell your solutions, is figure out who really drives IoT within that organization, because you can't always default to IT. When we looked at our survey responses, if you piece out the folks that had actually deployed IoT, being very careful about the definition of IoT, right? So we only found 20% having deployed it. And those 20%, if you piece out that constituency of early adopters, the leads were actually product management. It wasn't operations, it wasn't IT. If you look at the folks that are not adopting, then that's all over the place. But I think the key lesson there was no one defining functional group that stood out. So it says that it's still being led by internal innovative groups. Somebody has a vision. Could it be marketing? Could it be product? Could it be operations? And they drive it. And then we've heard this from solution developers in the audience as well that says, I sell my solutions to ops, or I sell it to marketing, and I say sorry to IT later on, right? So that's what makes, I think, IoT challenging as a market to sell to. Is you really have, I think, a much more, your sales process is a little bit different.
Okay.
Because it's all about the use cases, right? So
Absolutely.
the use cases are coming in from the ground up.
Yep.
Yep.
And if you look at the data analytics world, not forget big data, but also in the IoT side, it's all about use cases. Who within your organization is asking you specifically for that information and needs it to do something, whether it's increased productivity or efficiency or savings of money or something else like that. So it is bubbling up, and the executive level is having to say, oh, this is a great idea. Oh, that's a bad idea. I'm not spending money on that. And that's where it becomes difficult to differentiate within an organization.
And I think that's where some of the ROI challenges that you folks brought up
Correct.
earlier arise, right? Because there are certain functional groups where ROI, if you're in ops, productivity by machines, uptime and stuff, I can quantify that much easier than marketing does, or customer care. Because we found the customer care constituency within these organizations that we surveyed, they saw the benefits of IoT because they could reduce the amount, they could know better what was going on with whatever product they were trying to service, or preempt customer calls and things like that. So the value's there, but how do you quantify some of these benefits? It's a little bit more of an inexact science there, right?
And what might be in the beginning the answer for it, 6 months, a year from now, is not even close to the original reason, which is a good thing. Right?
Yeah.
You're finding more progression in the reasons for doing things.
Yeah.
A lot of it, I think, too, is categorical, because if historically we're used to talking about a device ecosystem, Android, iOS, take your industrial counterpart. But now it's about ecosystems of devices, so it's not as siloed. We're talking about how do these things all work holistically and interoperably, yet still be aware of the fact that there is a device ecosystem and that they do somewhat, to an extent, live separately.
Yeah, and I would add it, not only a device ecosystem, but an ecosystem at multiple layers of the stack. So you have multiple devices, multiple platforms, multiple connectivity providers, so you have ecosystems of ecosystems, essentially, that are coming together here. And that makes it pretty difficult to build something out that's end-to-end, that's scalable, that's reliable, that's going to last you for a long time if you're working with, at least, 5 to 7 different vendors, maybe including some integrators to build a solution, and you're trying to make sure that each of those components is best of breed. That's a pretty daunting task to start with, and that I think that sets people back.
So Ryan, you've got a question? Let me just stick with this theme for a moment, and then you can have the question.
I want the question. We want the question.
You want the question. Go ahead. You win, Ken. Okay, Sri. Hi, Sri.
Hey, Carl. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. My name is Sri Ramachandran. The question was relating to who is responsible in the enterprise for doing things. So a couple of days ago, I read in a trade rack something about a new job called the Chief IoT Officer. So obviously, it's a very aspirational role. Everybody wants to jump into that, I guess. But I think, in my mind, what it signifies was that the CIO role is kind of run out of oomph. And obviously, you need somebody up the operational chain to lead the whole IoT IoT initiatives within the enterprise. Is that true? Is that what you guys are hearing? And I just was curious to hear your perspectives on that.
I always see the idea of where we're seeing articles written about IoT. And I get CEO Magazine, CIO Magazine, Fortune, Business Week. They all have IoT-related articles on a consistent basis. The readers of those are usually the executive levels. And we're seeing a lot of people from the top down being involved in making decisions on whether to go forward with IoT. So that is who we go after, and making sure that they have the buy-in there, that the funding is going to be approved to be able to move through the system, because it is a difficult decision. It is a difficult integration period that takes a little bit of time. So we're seeing executives making those decisions, not necessarily from the bottom up.
Well, and it's interesting to think about. If you think about an IoT deployment inside of an organization, it's almost like running an internal startup. Because you have to manage hardware, you got to manage software, you got to manage networking, you got to manage use cases, you got to manage adoption. to internal customers. Yet you're being held to the traditional enterprise metrics. And so you don't get to play by the fast and loose rules of a startup inside a big company. And so this kind of entrepreneurship actually creates an opportunity for the people in the audience to help scaffold that relationship for your internal customers, to help them build that organization that actually drives that adoption internally, realizing that once you sold them, you have to help them sell internally the full stack, especially as it relates to the ROI piece. Because typically, when you roll into an operations or product management team, they're more worried about how many nines of reliability and things of that sort. When you start having conversations with them about ROI, they're like, Roy? Who's Roy? I didn't invite Roy to the meeting. And that's a huge opportunity, I think, in the market.
I think that's a huge point, because I think there still needs to be somebody who has sort of this broader responsibility across functional groups in order to really drive these things effectively, right? But that's a wish list, but in reality, I don't think... it's interesting you asked the question, because we just published our top 13 predictions for 2016 in IoT, and one of our predictions was you're going to see the first chief IoT officer assigned or
Already been done. Already been done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Who is?
So when we take a look at this,
yeah.
thing, this is very similar to what the cloud looked like a decade ago when it was first coming up, and we saw chief cloud officers for a while, right? It's a transitory period. And I've been quietly sitting here for the past 7 minutes thinking about this, and I heard a lot about connectivity, and it's about the device, and it's about this, and it's about that. And at the end of the day, I didn't hear anybody talk about it's about contextualizing the data. And I heard Godfrey talk a little bit earlier about the SIs getting involved, right? Here I am to save the day, the SI's here. When are they coming? Those guys got a big problem right now because they got a business model predicated on forklift upgrades and man hours on operational databases for big enterprises, right? And how are you gonna balance that with creating the perfect platform for IoT and reducing the cost and complexity?
Right.
That's a huge issue right now, and that's why they got to be slow to come here. But
so that's a very interesting conundrum, right? Because when we ask enterprises, who do you look to for advice on IoT, and you again piece out the adopters, guess who comes up? SIs, because SIs are always there for these complex projects, right? And IoT has quickly, at least especially for the adopters, they see the complexity in these solutions, especially as you go to multi-tiered, multi-siloed solutions. It's increasingly complex. And so far, I think about going to my SI to help solve these things. But as James pointed out, there are sort of counter forces in the incentives that are working here, right? Yeah. So I think that there's an opportunity there.
So Sri, to get back to that question, it's, what's IoT being used for within that enterprise kind of is going to dictate what the role of that chief IoT officer is, and if they need one. Are they a user of it? Is it an enterprise that does things that's using video surveillance and HVAC systems, or are they deploying it? And if they're deploying it, that guy's going to have to be the guy that's, one throat to choke at the end of the day, that has the mandate, that has the timeline, that has the budget, and the CEO's got his back, and he's saying, go change our business. Go. At the other end, it's going to be the guy that's kind of wrangling these cloud systems and data systems and putting all that stuff together. And those are two really different things right now. And we've got to balance all that stuff out.
So Ken's got another question from the audience.
We do two more, in fact, but we'll start here.
I just want to double-click a little bit on the ROI, the measurement of ROI, and echo the fact that it's very difficult to measure ROI of sort of the service model, improve operation of the machines. What have you guys heard enterprises are trying to measure? Are they metrics internally? Are there data points that we can provide from the stuff that we build that help them measure ROI around those two points?
Well, I've talked to several companies that say actually measuring the ROI is pretty easy. We don't want to share how we're doing it because it's our secret sauce. So why would we share that? We've got other guys that just don't believe the data at the end of the day.
And I'll give you a concrete example on that, okay? Because exactly to James' point, it's secret sauce, right? And it becomes competitive advantage to whoever that firm is. But a very concrete one. I want to reduce the amount of time it takes for me to get you your coffee when you're in that queue by 3 seconds. And there are IoT connected machine solutions that can help you get there with consistent quality, consistent quality of the beverage and stuff. Because if I reduce it by 3 seconds, I can increase my sales X amount, which then gives me the calculation to how much the system costs, et cetera, et cetera. That's actually a very real one. And you and I probably go to that store every day. So.
I think one area where it's, I think, quite difficult to measure ROI is more of in the IoT solution space. It's more about retaining customer relationships. So if you're a tractor manufacturer and you have an engineering team that they're top game, but they are building tractors, and then you bring in an IoT solution that's designed to provide sort of higher level of service to your customers. You may not have folks in-house that really understand customer relationships from the perspective that IoT allows you to do. You're sort of thinking, okay, they'll call us in 15 years when their tractor breaks down, and they'll buy a new one.
And although that
you've never owned a tractor, have you?
I haven't owned a tractor. Well, but my point is, you only call the manufacturer, when when there's a problem or when you're buying a new product. And if you don't hear from a customer, that means they went to your competitors.
And that John Deere tractor Caterpillar may cost just as much as the Tesla.
Absolutely.
But what about the UX experience? Does the Tesla driver have the same UX as the John Deere driver? Does he have the same need? Right?
Yeah. Every customer in every industry segment is quite different. Yeah.
John, you were going to say something, or?
No, I learned to drive on the John Deere Model B, so
right.
I have some deep experience on that. And it's interesting. I mean, what you're talking about is that when you start, how do you quantify ROI of a thermometer? Think about before thermometers even existed. How do you go to a doctor and say, how do you quantify the ability to actually understand if someone has a fever? It's life or death. And when you start to instrument something that's never been measured before, how do you have a baseline to measure that ROI?
Yeah.
When really it's got to be what comes back to the use case scenario. Mm-hmm. All this thing about devices, data, analytics, it's got to drive action. And the action is actually, in many cases, more important than the return on investment. Because it's hard to measure cost savings after the fact. It's hard to measure the woulds and the coulds in the midst of all that. But if you can drive action and you see performance improvement overall, and you can tie back the action to something that you couldn't have done without the IoT infrastructure in place, at the end of the day, adoption is driven by stories as much as numbers.
Right.
And the parlay on the stories, a lot of times people are just looking for ROI because my competition is doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
And they turn around and go, oh, I have to do that. And it's something I have to do because John Deere's doing it, so I'm Komatsu, I have to do it, and I'm Case, so I have to. And it becomes a situation where they must be getting an ROI, so I can get one too, so why can't I implement the same asset tracking application?
Do you have a FOG? Because we have a FOG. Right.
Yes.
Right. Oh, dear God, 3 companies just deployed. We need to have 3 more platforms.
That's right. And then we go back to interoperability, James. How do we do that?
But don't you think that to some extent, if not a large extent, that's exactly what these companies are hoping is going to happen? By saying, hey, we have 80% of major airlines use our platform. To the other 20% that says, okay, we need to find something better, or we need to do this too, just so we can stay competitive.
Well, one case scenario that you guys didn't bring up, the one that I get a big charge out of, is the CAT scan companies and the fact that we've now gone to leasing by usage based. And what's happened is all the urgent care centers that have popped up all over the place now have CAT scanners because of the fact that they just found another way to sell it based on the usage, right? So,
as you go back in the ROI scenario, a lot of us have been from the IT side of the world before getting in the mobile side. We used to look at OpEx and CapEx, and now there's so many people in the IoT area that are now putting it all into OpEx. I want the hardware buried, I want the airtime buried, I want everything, all the software and integration buried into it, and have a certain level of monthly expenses on it. That's an ROI too, because it didn't have, from an overall standpoint, like an infrastructure buy in the old days.
Right. I'd rather have a lower rent than a higher depreciation schedule.
Correct.
Ken's got another question for us.
I do, and before
Only
we do
on
that
side of the room,
I'm going up. They keep calling me over.
There are ringers over on that side of the room. Stay where you are. Go
There's
ahead.
a couple of them I see.
I'll come your way. I promise. I'm coming there next. Well, almost next. Fun fact, by the way, Sony just bought Altair Semiconductor for $212 million. So, fun fact.
All right, thank you. So my name is Randolph Wheatley. I'm with a company called Census. We deliver smart metering solutions and other solutions to utilities. And what I'd like the perspective of the panel on is you have these systems that are already deployed. They fall under the IoT umbrella. How do you see things evolving in terms of those existing systems and how they're going to fit into this broader IoT umbrella?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Thanks.
That's a great question. I think it's inevitable that there will be some kind of connectivity capability for all the existing systems that are there. To retrofit what you already have, again, to be able to go into providing ROIs and whatever that is for that building, for that meter. So I believe that you're going to see a lot more of those retrofit capabilities in order to get to deployments faster.
Yeah, I think the assumption of mutual exclusivity around M10 and IoT is a false one. Not to say that that's what people here would assume, but the same way we look at cell phones, they don't just have cellular, they have Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and maybe even something else. I think IoT is going to run the same course, and it already is, in terms of not just how these things are getting connected, but what's getting connected, what kind of data they're capturing, and also what you're able to do with it. It's a much more diversified, I think, approach than a lot of folks, ourselves included, are led to believe.
Stay tuned for our next session. Go ahead.
Well, and it's interesting also, I mean, you look to the maker communities to see how people are doing that retrofit into the IoT space. You've got these kind of module startups like Spark and others that are basically saying, go forth and be creative. And plug it in. And that's going to drive more adoption than we all collectively understand or realize today, because there are so many blind squirrels out there searching for nuts. It's going to be a good harvest.
Yeah, and I would add that I think perhaps a bigger challenge than connecting those devices is really integrating a newly connected device into an existing operational infrastructure and getting the process people to understand this device is now connected, here are the security implications, here are the business implications. A lot of the folks that have something that's already working don't want to change it. You know, if their job's on the line based on making sure that it's 99.99% efficient, you don't really want to change things, even if you could add another 9 to that if no one's forcing you to make that change. So, even if you had all the technology to connect those existing legacy devices, a big challenge is getting the business to actually be open to taking on that risk.
Godfrey, anything? James?
You deploy your solutions for utilities. God bless you, because there's only one group that moves slower than telcos, and that's utilities, right?
Yeah.
About 8 months ago, I had a panel in San Francisco, and I got the CIO of LA, Peter Marks, to basically say that there are no such things as smart cities. It's a whole bunch of smart silos, and a lot of it's not just the devices that you have a challenge with. It's the politics of those people that have the devices under their direction. So getting a water guy to think outside the box and not like a plumber is pretty hard. Getting the electrical guys to not think. Think about this. If Bell walked into the room today, would he know what an iPhone was and how to use it compared to what he left us with? But if Tesla walked in the room today, would he know how to flip on a light switch? And would he know what the basic power distribution grid looks like? He probably would. So we haven't changed those things yet to the point where we need to. And what a lot of these people are going to have to do is not take a look at connecting the device at the end of the day. It's how do we connect the device? Many different ways, because there's going to be many different things that are connected, and it's those maker communities. But abstracting that data at a much higher level and using open data to be able to make sense of it, because it's not about the device, it's about the information. So
I have a comment here on the ROI. My name is Ben Sorensen. I'm from Sigma Designs, which is behind the C-Wave technology. So if you want to have a use case on ROI, you can go to ADT. ADT is obviously traded on the stock exchange, so they provide quarterly reports. In their quarterly reports, you'll see that 3 years ago, only 25% of their 1 million Pulse customers took the wireless Pulse system. That number is now up to 75%. So in other words, they are expanding that segment immensely, and at the same time they're reducing their churn. And what you can also see from those reports is that the more devices people actually have in their home, the happier they are. So I think that's a pretty good use case.
But they also didn't. But they also didn't take it simply because they chose it. They took it because the sales guy was incented to actually push them that direction, and also because prices came down on the wireless service versus.
He said ADT, correct?
Yeah, ADT.
Yes, ADT.
So Don Barima is the vice president of sales, ex-AT&T wireless guy who knows how to sell that stuff. And so he incented his sales team so well, and so that's part of the reason, and I agree with you on that, but it is a great ROI. It is definitely sticky.
Yes.
It is now getting into this connected home stuff that they're doing. But so if you look at Lowe's with Iris, and you look at some of the other organizations that are doing it, but that was a great sales scenario that has done.
Do I have a moment? Or no,
I've got more questions.
I see Chuck there, so go ahead and let Chuck ask a question.
Hi guys, Chuck Myers from Cisco. It's a unicorn question.
Uh-oh.
If you were venture capitalists, each with, say, $10 million burning a hole in your pocket to invest in the IoT infrastructure market space, what subsegment of IoT do you think would be the most likely to yield you that billion-dollar company valuation that you so covet?
Actionlytics. And what I mean by Actionlytics is basically trans analytics. We're to the point now where everyone has a bar graph. But what you do with that bar graph and how do you then start to integrate that into intelligence for the company to take action is where I think the biggest opportunity for venture investment is.
It's like prescriptive analytics.
Do I have to use a copyright on that term?
No, you don't. No.
Yeah,
That's my gift to the community. No, the Actionlytics.
Is that different than prescriptive?
It just sounds better. I don't know. Well, Actionlytics is a little bit different than prescriptive. Prescriptive typically relies on machine learning pieces, right? Where we've seen this before, therefore these things tell us we should go left instead of right.
That would be predictive.
Right. I think for
like it tells you what to do and is sort of the actionable component of the insight.
Yeah.
Maybe semantics? I just want to make sure I fully understand what Actionlytics is.
I just made up the term here. No, it's my own term. It's something that we've been seeing in our own practice for a little while about how you help enterprises take action. As you see the evolution within the IoT space, I spent several years in the military intelligence community, and it was all about all the investment in Air Force intelligence was in collections of data. And where we always would fall on our face was taking action based on that. There's lots of examples of that. And so as you see these different ecosystems evolve over the years, the ability for people to take action on what this community collectively has been working on, I mean, this is an overnight success 30 years in the making. And now is the time where those investments start to pay off, but it's in how the enterprise takes action. So whether it's prescriptive, whether it's Actionlytics, whether it's Magic 8 Ball 2.0, it's how we help the companies take action. And the companies that are figuring that part, who are taking these internets of things and integrating them together, because at the end of the day, a large enterprise is going to have multiple internets of things from multiple platforms and multiple vendors.
So, John, before the rest of them go, and given the fact that Chuck's from the fog edge computing side of the equation,
yes.
Does those actionable items represent driven down tools that basically get performed at a certain level rather than basically back upstairs? Tell me, how do you see that working out?
So how do you drive the decision making down to the people actually? So a lot of that is how do you enable the carbon-based resources to work well with the silicon-based resources at the working level. Be that person at the ops center, be that the person, because it's not about getting the boss a pretty glossy report about these are the 3 actions we recommend for next quarter. It's more about the day-to-day. When you start to be able to instrument your entire enterprise in real time, the ability to act and react based on a combination of what we've seen before from a predictive analytics and what is possible from a prescriptive analytics is I think that where the opportunity is, especially from the standpoint, we're seeing this in social analytics today, where the phase 1 of social analytics was, here's your buzz. Now you're seeing tools evolve where they're actually recommending to the people, social media managers talking in the channel today, actions to take from a customer care standpoint, or actions to take from how to drive your own narrative into the marketplace standpoint, where you didn't see it before. And that's where I think IoT has a big opportunity if you had that money burning a hole in your pocket.
I'll throw out another category there.
Chuck, I'm going to take your money in two different places. So I'm going to take the 10 million in one area and then take
just what's the first account number? Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I figured he's giving it. I'm also the first area is, and we've brought that subject up on numerous occasions, is systems integration. I think the idea that as a independent systems integrator, there's systems integration groups within your organization as well as a lot of other ones, but it's tied to the hardware, it's either tied to the carrier or something else, but an independent SI, because not only can you make the fees, the professional services fees to do the work, but there's a recurring revenue stream also that you can get as a systems integrator. I think the second piece is I look at return on investment through recurring revenue, right? So when we're looking at investments at a Sand Lake, you're looking at long-term, what is my recurring revenue stream going to look like? And so I would look at smart cities. And the reason I like smart cities so much is because, and I'm doing a speech at Mobile World Congress on this, look at all the nodes that get associated with a smart city application. Has anybody deployed a smart city application in the U.S.? Raise your hand. Has anybody been involved in anyone in the U.S.? One?
A couple.
The opportunity is insane when you think about everything that goes on in that smart city that can be connected and chargeable from some independent group within the government agency or through a systems integrator that does that. So I look at the money you can make in deploying and then the recurring revenue that can come out of there.
So I want to throw out a couple other categories, because I think the trick is here, you said unicorn, so you said billion-dollar valuation, right? So I totally agree.
There's only 147 of those, by the way.
No, exactly.
Only about 20 of them are unique, but we'll ignore that fact.
And so the trick with that is, I totally agree. Analytics, I think we're in for a bunch of data scientists that are going to get rich in the next couple of years. But and if you're one, then it's time to start up a company. But I think we're looking at 100 millions types of valuations, right? And which is nothing to sneeze at. Security is, I think, an area to be looking at. But again, there, I'm thinking, like, are we going to get $2 billion? I don't know, maybe. But nice $300, $500 million exit, I won't complain. I'm happy to join a security startup that's on that path. No offense to my founders. But $1 billion startup, though, I think about the sharing economy and think about, and some folks are doing this already, but it's a sharing economy that really leverages the Internet of Things versus just the Internet. So it's that next level. And I mean, obviously, Uber's selling congestion data to cities already, but I think there's this whole new type of sharing economy that's really enabled by connected devices. And we still need more of these connected devices to get out there, but I think that's where the next unicorn, and that's the consumer thing again.
James, you got a thought?
Yeah, Chuck, I got time in my booth at later this afternoon, room number 7. I'm going to cash your check. Because 10 million is a rounding error in a billion, my friend. And you're Cisco, you got a hell of a lot more cash than that, and you need to grow at a hell of a lot higher rate than $1 billion to make it count. So come visit me later, and I will help you.
Okay, so that was nice. I'll throw in my 2 cents on this mix, which is for God's sakes, that's very simple. Where's Paul Semmelback? Is he in this room? Paul, scream out if you are. Okay. He just wrote a social machine book. You don't want to make any revenue. You just want to have all the devices like each other. And you do that, and all of a sudden you'll be venture capital heaven in California.
It's already happening. That's Twitter.
Yeah, there we go.
It's more bots than people on Twitter.
Yeah, now we've got robot Twitter. Yeah, go ahead.
I've got one word for you, Carl. Plastics.
Good morning, fellas. Jeff Liebel here, most recently with Digi International. Slight different spin on that question, similar question. What vertical industries or product categories would you say are most vulnerable over the next 24 months to disruptive new IoT entrants?
Everything.
That's a great question.
Cities, agriculture.
Would you say?
Cities, agriculture, water. Right? If we run out of water, we're dead. Right? We can run out of oil and we can spin wind. Right? We can do solar. We run out of water, we're dead.
Yeah, Flint would have liked to have had a smarter city.
Yeah, I'm on the smart cities bandwagon also. I think that, just between the traffic and the efficiencies and the savings and everything else around there. I think that's going to be hugely disruptive over the next, because the limited amount of hands that were raised on how many people are deploying just in the U.S., and it's very low in Asia where it's a lot more popular too. So,
I've talked to two mayors that are both in the top 10 cities over the last month, and both of them said they're only going to do things that help them get elected, and they think smart cities are going to do that or reelected. So, I do think there's going to be a huge push in that direction.
The mayor of Atlanta did that at the AT&T Developer Conference at CES this year. He said, I'm only putting anything into IoT that gets me elected. And he said that to an entire audience of 5,000 people.
That's his number one.
Honest politician.
He was. Yeah. And you have to go through me and my council people to get that deployed. So how do you want to...
Recent studies in Flint, Michigan suggest that water treatment might be valuable.
But that's a good point, because what drives the markets isn't always business, right? Because the smart city, remember, smart cities...
Well, that's the oldest business.
Well, yeah, politicians, right? So the smart city use cases that will be driven will be the ones that are most visible.
That's right.
Not necessarily the best ROI, but it's actually the most visible to the voters.
Which is the traffic issues and everything related to being able to control that and make your roadways more efficient without having to spend more city funds, state, federal funds on transportation costs.
Well, I can give you one example. If a company like AT&T wants to connect all of these vehicles, and they want to do so not just by offering a service that connects the car itself, but actually by selling Wi-Fi in the vehicle connectivity, what better way to do it than hit it sort of from the ground up, which is what? Kids. But how do you do so tastefully? That's tough. One option might be to say connect school buses for free, some sort of freemium model. Because who doesn't want to have, for AT&T, who doesn't want to have a kid going home to their parents in a car with their parents or with their family, with their friends, with their family's friends, saying, well, shoot, my school bus has Wi-Fi, why don't you? Those are the kinds of conversations, I think, that are really going to be driving the adoption of IoT, at least in terms of interest. A lot of it is grassroots. A lot of it's awareness. A lot of it's sort of surfacing these relevant insights and finding, oh, maybe this could be meaningful to me in a different context. So a lot of it is more personal, I think, than we like to think or admit. But at the end of the day, yes, it's a business decision that's going to be driving a large-scale rollout, but it's these highly personal interactions with these devices or elements that's going to be, I think, starting the conversation going, at least in terms of getting down that path.
Carl, part of in the last 6 minutes and 27 seconds, we have your description of this panel was hockey sticks,
right?
And looking at those, can I ask a question of the audience?
Sure.
How many people have deployed 1 million devices in our space? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13 people in this entire room. So that's 13.
Hopefully not from the same company. Go ahead.
That's correct. I'm assuming that. They're all sitting, only 2 are together.
Some clusters here.
So what a huge opportunity. Because even if the soothsayers are right with 20 billion in 4 more years from where we are today, and you have a room full of people that are in this industry, day in, day out, trying to make a living, trying to make money, trying to deploy, and you only have 13 people that have deployed 1 million plus, the opportunities are huge. So the hockey stick, I mean, how many people have lived through the wireless data hockey stick? You remember that back in the 70s and 80s? Yes, Jerry, yes, we have, right? So you look at the old days. So is IoT on the hockey stick on the way up? That's how I think of it, as we're ready to go.
Actually, I hope it falls off into the trough of disillusionment so we can get some real work done. Because that's when the great stuff happens, when everyone's not looking at what's going on and you're focused on actually getting things done for clients as opposed to...
So, am I clean? Can I ask a question, or do we have...
Sure. We have a hand raised over there.
There's a hand raised over...
There and over there.
Okay.
All right, I got to walk over there, so ask your question while I walk.
There'll be the last question, but I'll ask a quick one. Salesforce and Amazon both declared they were now in the IoT space. What's the implications for that? I mean, is that going to be the way that this becomes massively deployed by all enterprises, or is that just one more scenario in an endless world of Nests and HomeKits and other insert frameworks here?
How many
James, let's
people
go after our conversation yesterday. Go ahead and answer.
How many people host their application on Amazon, right? How many people use Salesforce for a CRM tool? Yeah, they're in it. Are they really in it? Are they in it to win it?
Right.
Are they in it to announce it?
Okay.
Can I make a comment here? Yeah. So back to the question before, where do you think would be a good place to start here? I believe that the front runners here are the security companies in the US. And why is that? Because traditionally they have installed a few devices, and then you pay your insurance premium, you pay the security company, but you really don't want to deal with them afterwards because you hope nothing happens. That has totally changed because now companies such as ADT, Vivint, Honeywell, etc. install this equipment, and all of a sudden they become part of people's everyday life. They turn something negative into something positive. That industry is exploding right now. Another one is the service providers. Yes, they take a very long time. But take a company such as America Mobile, run by Carlos Slim, 270 million customers. So get into a place like that. You only get 10%. That's not a bad start at all. And you have 5-6 devices in each setup. So it takes time, but the service providers, and I know from experience, they've been studying this for years. They're rolling out now. AT&T is a great example. Orange in Europe, several other places. So that, in addition to the security and the insurance companies, is where I would start.
Well, Steve mentioned this earlier. The sales team at these companies are doing a lot to drive adoption, right? And so you hear a lot about ADT, and you hear a lot about AT&T and Comcast and all that kind of stuff. When we look at how they're interfacing with the users and how the users are driving that experience. So actually, it just came out today, some analysis we did on smart home apps. The lowest rated smart home apps are from the biggest incumbent providers today. So ADT and AT&T disappoint consumers in their everyday interactions compared to Nest, compared to Honeywell, compared to Vivint. Vivint and Honeywell are the top 2 rated smart home apps, which means they're delivering the promise of the experience more than the incumbent players, which means they're ripe for disruption. So all the success you're talking about has the potential to be tremendously short-lived unless they figure out how to move from that, don't call us, we'll call you, into something that actually deserves to be interacted with on a regular basis, because they are disappointing consumers. And I'm glad to show you the data.
And just to add to that point, too, I mean, we have yet to really see good data on adoption of these smart home services from a telco standpoint. Most folks don't publish figures on it yet. But we are seeing interesting moves from like an AT&T. I mean, they invested hugely on their retail outlets, sales training, et cetera, to try and make that work. But I think it's still a little too early to tell. But that's exactly what makes it interesting. The right investments are happening, but the market is still building.
I actually utilize smart home services, but I've never had my insurer come up and say, I'm going to give you lower premiums if you're using usage-based insurance in the home. I believe that has the ability to change and disrupt things, just as usage-based insurance in automobiles has the ability. But today, it's not. It's a race to zero on price. All it is Flo making commercials on TV for Progressive. It is a race to zero on price. There's nothing unique, but if they utilize the right applications, it has the ability to transform businesses. The entire supply chain could be disrupted if you're using crash analytics.
Right.
It's part of that education process, right? Because let's also think about the rest of the world, right? In the third world, I've spoken to enterprises that are taking car tracking services that are getting no discount from their insurance company. So they're going back down and saying, hey, we just recovered that theft, the van that was stolen from us in 30 minutes, and you should give us a discount for our insurance. So those conversations are starting to happen, which should help adoption of these things, but it's just happening.
And with that said, please give our panel a round of applause.
Yeah.